Welcome to the new season of the Cold Front. I'm Rachel Duensing.
And I'm Matthew Schaefer. Now this year on the Cold Front, we want to dive deeper into the world of weather, and that includes covering all aspects of meteorology, but most importantly, what matters to you.
And we also want to hear from you as well. So if you have any dying weather questions or you just want to try and stump Matt and I, feel free to leave us a message on our Facebook page, which is VUTV Weather, and there's a chance that we could answer it here on the show.
And let's get right into the show with our first segment, the Weather Buzz.
Well, we're going to actually start out on the other side of the world. Actually, in the Pacific, there's some tropical weather going on there. That's actually quite fascinating.
Yeah, in fact, we have two typhoons right now spinning in the Pacific off the coast of China and Japan. The first one, a little bit closer to the coastline there, is Typhoon Francisco. That's only a Category 1 equivalent storm. It's not the most impressive thing looking out there, but then out a little bit further east is a beast of a storm. This super typhoon Lakima is now a Category 5 intensity. That's, of course, the top of the Saffir-Simpson scale, 5 out of 5. Very strong looking on radar and very potent, powerful. Now, the good thing about these is that we're watching these very closely. Obviously, any typhoon tropical system that impacts land, it could have major implications. The good thing, as we're watching these, it looks like both storms are going to start curving to the north and, for the most part, not make landfall. They might affect the coast a little bit in some places in Japan or some of the other Pacific islands out there, but for the most part, thank God these systems aren't going to hit land, and that's a really good thing. We're looking at some of these maps, impressive looking storms.
Yeah. Most definitely, and the eye on especially Lakima is very impressive. So definitely something really interesting to think about when we're looking at these systems that aren't really affecting us, but they're still really interesting to look at.
And just the fact that you have two systems and that proximity to each other, it's fascinating. You look at a satellite and usually you're focused on just one storm or maybe another, but one satellite image or map has both of these storms spinning off, and they both look really impressive. In fact, Lakima had a pressure drop, and then of course we're talking about the change of pressure. Obviously central pressure on a hurricane or a typhoon is something that we look at to see the intensity. This thing dropped 75 millibars in 21 hours. That's, to put that in perspective, that's just an extreme intensification of this storm, and that's part of the reason why it's all the way up at a Category 5 in a very mature looking system right now.
Definitely. And taking a little bit of a switch on certain weather systems, a little bit closer to home here in the States, we actually experienced a relatively early season snowfall. There are some areas in parts of Iowa. I think Iowa, actually, Davenport got about 2.5 inches of snow. So it's not a lot, but it is fairly significant for this time of year, especially, even though it is a little bit later in October, we don't necessarily hear about October snowfall all of the time. And there are places in Illinois that got approximately 2 inches of snowfall as well. So it's definitely really interesting to kind of see and hear about these early season snowfalls. Here in Valpo, we saw a few flurries, and I actually sat down and talked with one of the meteorology professors here, Dr. Craig Clark, and talked about some early season October snowfalls, but we will be seeing a little bit more of that interview a little bit later, but just a little bit of a teaser about that. Definitely more information coming there. It's quite interesting.
Yeah, I liked the bringing up the early season October snow is definitely interesting, but this is one of my favorite times of the year is the transition seasons in weather. We're kind of getting out of the summer heat and storms associated there and getting closer to winter, and when you get into these transition seasons, you can get some very interesting patterns. We have some tropical cyclones in both the major oceans right now, and then you're talking about winter weather in the continent. There's a lot going on, and that can happen as you change seasons, especially now in fall and spring as well. This is when you can get some really powerful storms as the pattern is setting up to change between summer patterns and winter patterns, and that is really something interesting going on right now. And if you're in the Chicagoland area, you've been feeling this cold that we've had because we're starting to get this very transitional pattern. The cold is just surging from the north.
Yeah.
Really cold air.
And that's why it's also not uncommon to hear about thunderstorms and severe weather during this time of year because it is a transitional season. We more hear about it during April because that is also a transition season, but really any sort of season where there's a change from warm to cold or cold to warm, you can have these chances of severe weather pop up. So wouldn't be surprised if some areas more towards the west will be seeing some severe weather within the next couple of weeks as the transitions continue on, but mostly winter is just starting to kind of settle its way in here a little bit, which some people are a little bit happier about. I know I like a little bit of cold weather, but I'm not ready for it to be quite freezing yet.
And I think it's important to kind of dig a little deeper into why this season, why these types of seasons, when you're getting everything changing, that you get these stronger storms. And part of that is when you get the season changes, you're ending this temperature change. You got to go from really cold to really warm, and that sets up on these boundaries of the temperature change is your fronts. And when the greater the temperature change over the fronts, the stronger they are and the more stuff they can cause. So that's why in these transition seasons you can see really strong storms, really big snows, although it doesn't always stick. I mean, it's impressive this time of year. I mean, Chicago, both O'Hare and Midway airports recorded a trace of snow on Tuesday. And that is early in October. It's been since the 1930s, I believe, since that last happened in the state.
And over the next couple of days, as we head into next week, we're actually going to be getting away from this kind of chilly pattern. We're going to be getting back to the 50s. It's going to be a little bit more mild. So definitely still in that transition.
But yeah, we're getting the 50s and we're thinking it's warm just because of what we've been having. But that's a little bit more average. I mean, it's going to be hard for us to get above average. And that's kind of like the system has a couple of blocking patterns in it. And that's really making this mess in the upper levels, something that we look at as meteorologists. We don't focus just on what's happening on the ground. We look at different steps up in the air. And the pattern is really interesting right now. You have a blocking pattern that just broke down in the west, and that really messed up the upper level jet streams. And it looks like a mess. We have a map over this right now, and it looks ugly. If you're not a meteorologist, you don't know what it is. And if you are a meteorologist, you still probably don't know what it is. I mean, it is all over the place. You really have to go into the thing. And that's just what's going to be happening here. And it's going to be interesting to see how this pattern evolves, because you have this in the models that we use. This isn't something they see every day. So this pattern is going to be very interesting to watch. I think it's going to put us into a little bit more progressive pattern, very active, going from the warm to cold like we've been talking about. I think that's going to really start to kick in here in the next couple of weeks.
Definitely. Well, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to zoom in a little bit closer to home. We're going to talk about what's been happening with Valpo weather specifically and what we can expect in the future. Stay tuned. You're watching the Cold Front here on VUTV.
Hi everybody, I'm Dick Vitale of ESPN, and I'm on VUTV. It's awesome, baby, with a capital A.
Interested in the television industry? Stop by our office in Schnabel Hall and join VUTV today.
And welcome back to the Cold Front, zooming in towards Valpo, and more specifically Valpo weather and what we've been seeing in the past couple of days. Really interesting, like we've been talking about transition, cold rain, not always the most fun, but there were snowflake sightings in Valpo on Tuesday.
I know. I was super excited. I like snow because I'm not necessarily ready for any accumulation. I was walking around in the rain and I did see a few wet snowflakes. So it made me really happy. You know, it wasn't accumulating. It wasn't causing too much of a mess here in Valpo, but I was happy just to see a little bit of snow. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, I love the snow. I was traveling to Chicago and no snowflakes there. The city keeps it a little bit warmer, and we stayed in all rain. And of course, that has major traffic implications, which of course we saw. Not most fun, but snow already at this point in Valpo can be very, very interesting. Obviously, like you said, nothing accumulated. We did not record a trace, nothing going on, but the snowflakes have started, and that is turning the tables towards maybe a little bit more snow coming soon.
Yeah. But before that, we're probably going to be seeing a bit of a warm up, kind of like what I was talking about before. We have that ridge out west, and that's going to bring in a little bit of warmer temperatures, like I said, mid, possibly upper 50s, something we haven't seen in a little bit. So definitely getting into a little bit more warm, a little bit more fall-like, closer to normal. While lately we've been very chilly, temperatures in the low to mid 40s, so we haven't really seen that in a while. I know I had to bring out some of my jackets and kind of reacclimate myself to some of the chilly weather.
Yeah, it's a very chilly stretch, and it's going to be hard to throw a forecast for any long term right now because of how progressive this pattern is going to get, how quickly the things are going to be changing. We're going to be having lots of times where we're going to go from really warm to really cold, and I think we're going to be close to whether or not we're going to stay on the warm side of this or the cold side of the next couple systems. So there's a couple days in the future forecast where I'm concerned whether or not a forecast could be off by 10 degrees, and that's just part of the season here. It all depends which side of the system you're on. If you're on the north side, you're going to be much, much colder, and that's because this temperature grading is so tight.
Yeah, and these long-term forecasts can get a little bit tricky when you're going out, a couple of weeks in advance, because it's like you said, sometimes one little thing will change quickly and it changes the entire model. And so you really just have to pay attention to those little things that are being put into the models, because one model, in a week could say we're going to be getting, 3 inches of snow, while the next model, in a couple days after that could possibly put us at, 50 degrees and sunny. It's one of those really interesting things.
And that's why trying to pinpoint a forecast so far in the future at a single point is going to be tough. What we can kind of see is trends, and the Midwest should be definitely in a split type, 2 seasons type of a setup, where parts of the northern Midwest are going to be pretty cold and not too bad on the south side. It all depends where that sets up, and it could be near Chicago, it could be further north, it could be further south. And just moving how close these systems will get to us, just a few miles, maybe 100 miles or so, can really change the weather pattern by an extensive amount of temperature and degrees, and that implies with rain and snow and all sorts of other stuff. It'll be a very fun period to watch the weather. Maybe not so fun if you want to try and do stuff.
Right. Speaking of trying to do things, since October, we are in the month of October. It's almost near the end. What do you think we can expect for Halloween? Talking about how hard it can be to forecast, a couple weeks in the future.
Halloween is going to be an interesting thing this year. Again, we're watching a couple systems that will be moving through near Halloween. Now, looking that far out to pinpoint the exact timing of a system is also not something we can do with somewhat of accuracy, but what we got here is there could be a couple systems coming through. Right now, the implications is we're going to be on the warm side, which is nice for your costumes, getting outside.
Right.
I mean, nothing's gets more frustrating than choosing a costume in September and having to cover it up with sweatshirts by the end. So, right now implications that will be in the 50s on Halloween, but it's going to be close. So keep your eye on that.
Right. So not really any spooky weather. No, not anything.
Spooky depends on your definition of spooky. You'll have to wait and find out, and I guess spooky would be more of a surprise. So if that's your case, I would suggest waiting.
What are you dressing up for Halloween?
Don't worry about that right now.
Okay. I guess it's a bit of a surprise, just like the weather.
Exactly.
Sounds
the forecast of my costume could change at any given time. But we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to investigate a couple October storms with Professor Craig Clark. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Cold Front. Earlier this week, I had the pleasure of sitting down with Professor Craig Clark. He's a professor of meteorology here at Valparaiso University, and he is a lover of snow. So when I sat down with him, we talked a little bit about some October snow events and some of his favorites.
It's not rare, but it's not common.
Okay.
Which seems like a contradiction, but what I mean is it's not that flukish. It's more common than people think, but of course the vast majority of years have no meaningful October snow, but it can happen. Well, just October in general is milder, so it has to be cold enough to snow. So probably about once a decade we get an accumulating snow here. So we do get some October snow, but usually it's light, just kind of a trace or a small accumulation. Every so many years, a decade or so, we'll have an accumulating snow that's more significant, but it usually melts pretty fast. Oh, good question. Good question. I mean, temperatures are really the thing that we have to worry about with early season snowfall. Time of day helps if it's at night, simply because it's not quite as warm. System that's coming through today that's essentially going to be rain with a few spits of snow maybe. If it had come in the middle of the night, would have been more likely to produce a little bit of light accumulating snow, but during the day, the way that it is, it's turning to all rain before it's even getting here. So temperatures are really the limiting factor early season, where you need a fairly deep layer that's below freezing near the ground. So not only do you need ground temperatures that are below freezing, but you can't really have much warmth a little bit aloft either. The 91 storm was just a really big early season snow with a lot of snow and wind in the northern Midwest, so parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota especially. Got a lot of early season snowfall with that storm, and the timing with Halloween was really neat. And that was actually one of the most significant systems of that entire winter. Most of that winter was mild and pretty boring, but that system up there was very impressive. Lots of snow, lots of wind, early season cold. It's very impressive. Well, it had been very warm. And so that sort of made it, there was a big shock and awe factor because it had been very warm. I was in Kansas at the time, and we had been way in the 70s, and then towards 80 actually some days. And then nice cold air outbreak, early season came down, and it was a shock and awe change in temperature. And then that low developed in the southern plains, and then just took a path that put rain towards the south, but heavy snow and lots of wind up in parts of Wisconsin, Minnesota, and the northern Midwest in general. That in some ways is much more unusual, because you had that big extratropical transition of Hurricane Sandy into then, what was sometimes called Frankenstorm because of the Halloween timing. That was really unusual, because you had initially a tropical system, actually a hurricane, and then it very quickly went extratropical, and the timing was perfect with a change in weather patterns fostering the cold air, because it had been very warm in the east. So the same places that got significant snowfall, not so much along the coast, but a little bit inland, had been really warm just a few days before. So that helped make that such an unusual event. And of course, big northeast snowstorms, nor'easters, are not uncommon, but they're usually later in the season, and systems that rip up along the east coast, not something that comes in from the central Atlantic like that. In 1989, there was a spectacular October snowfall. South Bend received 8.8 inches, which is amazing in October. Leaves were still on the trees. It had been fairly warm and got warm after the event, but they had that heavy snowfall, and it was just very, very impressive. We didn't have as much snow in Valpo, a few inches. It was melting faster, but that was an extraordinary October event.
Obviously, a big thank you to Dr. Craig Clark for sitting down and doing that interview with me. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to have some final thoughts. Stay tuned. You're watching the Cold Front here on VUTV.
I'm Lynette Grant, and I'm on VUTV.
My name is Chris Frankel, and I'm on VUTV.
Hi, I'm Nicole Batzig, and I'm on VUTV.
I'm Chris Sosnowski, and I'm on VUTV.
I'm Mary Steele, and I'm on VUTV.
And welcome back to the Cold Front. Normally at this point we have what we're going to be calling our Fast Cast. That's the viewer question part. So if you have any questions that you want answered about the cold front weather, anything that you want to know, please send it to us. We'll try our best to answer it.
That goes for the same if you have any show ideas, anything that you may want us to talk about here. Definitely send those to our Facebook page. Just a reminder, that is VUTV Weather. All you have to do is send us a message and just tell us anything you want to talk about or hear about on the next episode of the Cold Front. We will definitely take into consideration.
And with that, that's going to do it for this episode, the first episode of the year of the Cold Front. For Rachel Duensing, I'm Matthew Schaefer. Have a great day.